Welcome to part 2, where we set out on a quest to turn back 105 years of lost railway history, while the Bachmann ROD 280 takes part in a typical day just after it arrived back in the UK. The Railway Operating Division, ROD, of the Royal Engineers began its operations in France in 1915, utilising locomotives and rolling stock supplied by the French and Belgians. However, as the war progressed, relationships between the UK and these countries became strained. The French intentionally kept their locomotives away from the fighting zones, and by 1915 they started demanding the return of their loaned locomotives, with the Belgians following suit. With the UK's commitments to the war effort in Europe, British locomotives were requisitioned from mainline companies. Eventually around 600 locomotives were sent to France. However, what was truly needed was a standard heavy goods class engine, and that's where the ROD 8K 280 locomotive, designed by Robinson in 1911 of the Great Central Railway, came into play. The first orders for the ROD locomotives were placed in February 1917, followed by more orders in 1918, resulting in a total of 344 locomotives being delivered. Additionally, 196 locomotives were ordered in late 1918 to support British industry's transition away from war production. This brought the total number of locomotives built to government orders to 521. Our locomotive, 1918, was ordered in June 1917 along with 49 others, and it was built at the North British Locomotive Hyde Park Works in 1918. These locomotives were incredibly robust machines, with only a few differences from the Great Central design. They had adjusted wheel profiles to accommodate the slightly wider gauge used in France, steel fireboxes, and notably Westinghouse automatic braking systems instead of the vacuum brakes typically found on British locomotives at the time. The loco and tender steam brakes were applied simultaneously with the application of the air brake. Both ends of the locomotive were equipped with steam heating connections, which was unusual for goods engines to say the least. This feature facilitated the transport of troop trains, a significant role for these engines. These locomotives achieved speeds of up to 40 miles per hour, much to the surprise of the French railway staff. At the front of the locomotive, on either side of the smoke box, there were screw re-railing jacks, as the track conditions were often poor. The locomotives were shipped from Portsmouth to Le Havre initially, and later by Richborough train ferries. Upon arrival, they were quickly pressed into service without even being run in, as they were urgently needed to transport reinforcements to the Italian front after the collapse of the battle at Capriato. Instead of being marked with Ministry of Munitions, which actually owned them, the locomotives have ROD painted in large white letters on their tender sides. Interestingly, to the soldiers in this relentless war, they became known as roll-on demob engines. Out of the 325 engines that worked in France, our engine, 1918, was one of them. Their duties included handling military supply trains, troop trains, and even some civilian services. With Germany's surrender in November 1918, fewer new engines were sent to France. The locomotives already there were primarily involved in bringing the troops back home. By mid-1919, most of the engines had returned to the UK, except for a few that remained to run the daily leave trains from Cologne, deep within the enemy territory, to Boulogne. Once back in the UK, the locomotives were towed in groups of 4 to temporary storage at Tattenham Corner Station near Epsom. At times there were up to 150 locomotives stored there, with each train consisting of 4 locomotives and tenders, separated by empty wagons and a brake van at each end, and limited to a speed of just 10 miles per hour. In the spring of 1919, interested railway companies began negotiations with the government to purchase these surplus locomotives. The Great Central Railway and Great Western Railway purchased 3 and 20 locomotives respectively. The London North Western Railway was about to close a deal, but all sales were halted as the government decided to pull the locomotives and explore overseas sales instead. However, the government ultimately decided against selling these engines and instead loaned them to the struggling railway companies that were dealing with the aftermath of the war. The Ministry of Transport took responsibility for these locomotives now. Out of the 498 locomotives available, 487 were in use by June 1920. Our locomotive 1918 was loaned to the London North Western Railway along with 150 others. After their storage, these locomotives were in rough condition, requiring around £400 each for remedial work. The loan was not free either, as a 12% levy on the locomotive construction cost was imposed, amounting to approximately £1,000 per engine. During this period, many locomotives continued to carry the ROD livery. However, they all had to be returned by 1922. It would be too complex and time-consuming to tell the full story of these locomotives, but almost all the other companies leased or purchased these locos, the Great Western and L&NW being notable, but the London South Western region had some too, and operated services to Exeter. But we must constrain ourselves to follow our loco 1918. In September 1919, our locomotive, along with several others, found its way to the London North Western Railway and became loco number 2873, together with 180 of her sisters. She operated on the London North Western Railway network. In August 1921, the London North Western Railway returned all locomotives, except for the 39 they purchased, to the government, and this included our locomotive, which was renumbered back to 1918. It wasn't until March 1927 that she would become LMS 9664. The LMS purchased 75 locomotives, including ours, from the Disposals Corporation at the incredibly low price of just £340 each. Initially the plan was to use the tenders, but it was later decided to overhaul 20 locomotives, ours being one of them. New copper fireboxes were ruled out, so the locomotives would only last as long as they're still fireboxes. Locomotive 1918, now numbered 9664, was immediately put to work after being fitted with vacuum brakes. However, she was withdrawn from service in December 1930 and did not see service under British Railways. And there, my friends, we must conclude this incredible story. Many of our locomotive sisters found themselves exported to various parts of the world, including Australia, China, South America and the Middle East. What a remarkable journey this locomotive had, and it took extensive research and a new book to uncover the true story. I've added this clip of my Great Western rod, also by Bachmann, from 2016, in view of the large number of these locomotives the Great Western acquired. You might like to note the detail differences.